WTH, my simp husband turns into psycho and sold off my whole business.
The one very mistake I made ruined my life and my marriage. I didn't know that this mistake could mess things up for me. My husband caught me with his boss, and he didn't think twice before taking out his revenge on me. I take full accountability for my actions, but he just went too far with his revenge. He shouldn't have acted the way he did. His revenge was just too cruel. My husband perfectly planned everything and waited for me to fall right into his trap. I fell for it, and now I'm reaping the consequences. Hi guys, my name is Patricia, and I am a 27-year-old fast food owner. The name of my husband is Michael. He is a 30-year-old business analyst. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, but unfortunately, we're no longer together. We have known each other for a very long time. Michael was 18 years old when he and his family moved into our neighborhood. At that time, I was 15 years old. Practically, Michael and I were childhood friends. Michael and his family moved into the town at that time because they had transferred his father for work. And so, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. At some point then, both of us parents got closer together and made friends. But Michael and I had our own little differences and often argued over little things. Something seemed off with Michael at that time. He was not like the usual kids. He didn't like playing or associating with friends. He was always reading even when it was a holiday. Honestly speaking, Michael was an introvert. Few months after Michael and his family had moved in, Michael and I later got along. We became friends and spent time together whenever his family came over for dinner. We even attended the same high school down to college. We never dated during that period. We were just friends and neighbors. 2 years after graduation from college, Michael asked me out. I patiently waited to be his girlfriend. I liked Michael back then, but I didn't tell him because I didn't want to be turned down, and also we weren't friends. I accepted, and we dated for a year before we finally tied the knot together. The wedding was memorable, and I felt like I had made the best decision at that time. We were in love with each other. So guys, a few months after our wedding, everything moved fine, and we lived happily. We were an average couple then because we were just trying to figure out something meaningful with our lives. We planned to not take any financial assistance from our parents, and we survived each day. At that time, our parents' relationship became stronger because of our union. Despite everything then, Michael treated me nice. We went on regular dates, and he also bought me gifts. He never gave me a chance to look outside or even regret marrying him. That even brought us closer together. 1 year after our wedding, Michael got promoted at his office. He gave professional advice to the company he was working with, and also was made a personal assistant to his boss. After Michael's promotion, everything went well and we lived happily. I also opened a fast food restaurant with the help of Michael. He supported my business and came over to help me out with work anytime he was work-free. It wasn't an easy start. The first few months were challenging, but I overcame all the challenges with the help of Michael. My husband also referred his colleagues to the restaurant to either have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they all did. One day, while I was at the restaurant sorting out the sales for the day, I got a call from Michael's mom, Trisha. I quickly picked the call and we exchanged our usual greetings. Michael's mom and I were very close. She treated me more like a daughter-in-law. Apparently, Trisha gave birth to Michael and 3 other boys, and so she took me like the daughter she never had. So guys, after our usual greetings, she told me that she was trying to plan a surprise for Michael Dad's 60th birthday. She told me that she wanted an extra hand, and I was the perfect person that would help her carry out the surprise. I was excited and told her how happy I was to help out. So I got off the phone and headed over to the house later that day. We made the necessary arrangement and set out the things we needed for the surprise. Everyone knew about the surprise except for Michael's dad, Dave. Trisha gave out a strict warning to all of us, and we all complied. 3 days later, it was Michelle's dad's birthday. The surprise really came out good. There were lots of drinks and food to eat. Everyone came with gifts, and it was a nice birthday party. Michael and I also gave him a very thoughtful gift. We all had fun. It was indeed a wonderful night, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The party ended at 10 p.m., and everyone exited the venue. My husband and I drove home together that night, and we headed to bed straight because we had a tired night. The next day, I woke up and turned to the other side of the bed, but I didn't find Mikhail as usual. He must have woken up early to go to work. I got out of bed and prepared myself to go to the restaurant. I did my morning routine and left home. I arrived at the restaurant and I saw that there were a lot of orders waiting for us. My workers and I got to work and we cleared it out. Not long after we had opened, my husband walked in with his boss, Raphael. His boss wanted to have breakfast at the restaurant that morning. My husband's boss had come over several times to have food at the restaurant. There were times he came and had food with his clients. I was used to having him around. So guys, I took out his order and one of my workers, Kate, served him. My husband also had breakfast with his boss. I sat at a corner and watched them eat. They kept talking about business, and at some point I didn't really understand what they were really discussing at that moment. A few minutes later, they were done and were ready to head out of the restaurant. Raphael left a huge tip for me because of how tasteful the food was. I declined at first, but he seemed persistent. And also, I looked at my husband to see if he was okay with it. But Michael didn't bother, and I collected it. I was very happy, and I thanked him for his generosity. We left the restaurant, and so I walked them to the car. They got into the car and drove off. Then I walked back into the restaurant and continued my work. 2 months later, it was our 3rd-year wedding anniversary. I got up very early that morning before Michael. Apparently, I had been planning on surprising him. A few minutes later, he got up. We exchanged our greetings and we told ourselves happy anniversary. I was very happy that he remembered despite his busy schedules. We got dressed and we went to our place of work. So guys, I got early from work that day because I wanted to surprise my husband. Of course, it was our 3rd year as a couple. I called him on the phone and told him to come back early, which he assured me he would. I went home and made a nice meal for her. I wanted us to have dinner at home. I did everything and lighted the candles. It was a romantic dinner date just for the two of us. Not long after, my husband arrived home, and I waited at the door for him to come. Immediately, he opened the door and I yelled, "Surprise!" He was so happy to see that I had taken time to celebrate our anniversary. We hugged and headed to the dining table. Apparently, my husband got me a gift when he was coming from work. We exchanged our gifts and professed our love to each other. We then proceeded and ate our meal. We cleared the table after we had our meal and went to watch our favorite TV shows. And after a while, I slept off. I couldn't watch the movie until the end because I was very tired. The next morning, I woke up and found myself on the bed. Michael must have had a hard time taking me upstairs. I thought to myself and laughed. As usual, my husband had left early to work. I decided not to go to work that day because I wanted to visit my parents. I haven't heard from them for a while then because I was so busy with work that I hardly had time for myself. I called Michael and informed him I would be going to see my parents. He said okay and told me to come back early, which I agreed to. I went to the bathroom and had my bath, got dressed, and left. I didn't bother informing them because I was very sure they were going to be at home. Plus, I wanted my visit to be a surprise. I arrived at my parents' house 15 minutes later. Yes, it was a 15-minute journey. We were that close to each other. I got out of my car and headed to the door. I knocked a few times, but no one opened the door. Everywhere was silent and I wondered what could be wrong. I still remembered the passcode and I went inside. I got in and no one was at home and everything was neatly put in place. I took my phone and called my dad, but his lines were off. At that moment, I was scared and had bad thoughts running through my mind. I called my mom, and after a few rings, she picked the phone. I asked her if everything was okay and why they weren't at home, but she said all was fine and told me not to bother myself about anything. Apparently, they went to visit a friend of theirs a few miles away from the neighborhood. So, guys, I was happy that nothing happened. Before I got off the phone with my mom, I told her I would wait for them to come back, and so I waited. A few hours later, they arrived home. I was very happy to see them, and we chatted for a while before I left and headed back home. By the time I arrived home, it was a few minutes past 6, and Michael hadn't come back at that time. I called him, and he told me he was a few minutes away from home. I went inside and freshened up and went downstairs. I thought about the things me and my mom had chatted about, and I felt happy. I had really missed them. Sometimes I feel like I haven't done enough for them. I was reminiscing about the fun I had with my mom when Michael walked in. I was startled at first because he didn't knock on the door as usual. Maybe I must have forgotten to lock it. We greeted each other and we asked ourselves about our day before he went upstairs to change. Immediately, I left to set his dinner, and I continued with what I was doing. A few minutes later, he came down to eat his meal and went back to the room. I was very curious about it because it was unlike him, and so I got up and asked him if everything was okay. He told me that he was just tired from the day's work, and so he came back to lie down. Honestly speaking, at that time he looked very tired. I also joined him in bed and we rested for the night. Michael's behavior continued for a couple of weeks, and I was becoming fed up with his constant mood swings. I decided to pressure him into telling me what was wrong with him. After much persuasion, he told me that he had been overworked by his boss for the past few months, and I was very surprised because he had told me they were not very busy at that time of the year. He then explained to me about them expanding their business and all. I saw the work was taking a huge toll on my husband, and I decided I was going to do something about it. The following day, I made up my mind that I was going to speak to Michael's boss, Raphael. I know I made the decision to do that on my own, but I needed to do something about it because my husband was grinding himself to the ground, and I knew he was not going to say anything to his boss because he loved what he did, i.e., his work. I was in the restaurant 2 days later when Michael called me about a work trip he was going on at the last minute, and I saw it as an opportunity for me to go pay his boss, Raphael, a visit. I knew I was doing the right thing because it was for the welfare of my husband. I quickly finished what I was doing and I left for their office. I got there, and every time I come here, I am very much in awe about the organization of the offices. I told his assistant I was here to see her boss, but she told me I didn't have an appointment. I tried explaining to her that I know him, but she couldn't listen to me. I gave up hope, and I was about to leave when I saw Raphael coming out from his office with a man. I quickly ran to him, and I told him about how I wanted to see him, and I didn't have an appointment. He apologized to me, and he ushered me into his office. I sat down, and I got straight to the point with him. I told him about Michael's recent poor health and how he had been overworking himself lately. Raphael put me at ease about everything, and he told me he was going to cut back Michael's working hours. At that point, I became very scared, thinking that I may have jeopardized his work, but he quickly told me that cutting back his hours doesn't mean Michael was going to lose his job. I felt relieved because I knew Michael was going to be upset if he found out that I paid his boss a visit without his knowledge. I told Raphael not to mention my visit to Michael. He agreed, and he walked me out of his office with his hand on my lower back. I felt some type of way, because he shouldn't have done that because I was the wife of his employee, and I thought they had some sort of friendship. After leaving the office, I went back home and called Michael. We talked for some time, and I found out he was feeling much better, and also he was extending his trip for a little while because his boss gave him time to rest. But I asked why he couldn't rest at our home. He replied and said he needed to be away from the city for a few weeks. I agreed to it because it can get really intense with the work they do. We said our goodbyes and I got into bed. Things were moving swiftly, guys. My husband was fine where he was and my business was moving forward. I was at the restaurant when Raphael came in with a group of men in suits. I assumed they were from his work. I asked someone to take their other and I continued with my work some hours later. I thought I should leave early and go see Trisha for a while. I was about to leave when I saw Raphael still in the restaurant, but that time he was alone. I went over to say hello, and he asked me to join him for a drink, which I accepted because I didn't want to seem rude to him. We talked about random things, and I discovered that Raphael was actually a very interesting person. He told me how he worked so hard from an early age, and because he was from a rich family, he had to work extra hard. I also told him about how Michael had worked his way up to be where he is today. I also told him it was one of the things I admired about my husband. I admired his dedication. I finished up my drink and I told Raphael I was meeting Michael's mom for dinner and I had to leave. He offered to drive me since it was late and I accepted. We talked on the way and I saw that I had misjudged Raphael because he was actually a very funny and easygoing guy behind the suits and the serious face he carried. He was so easy to talk to. He dropped me off, and we said our goodbyes. I greeted Trisha, and she kept on saying she hadn't seen me in months. I knew she exaggerated a lot, but months? We laughed over it, and we talked about Michael's recent trip, and she had asked me how I was doing without him. I told her I was coping fine. We ate and we gossiped for a little while before I went back home. When I got home, I went straight to bed, and I made a mental note to talk to my parents the following day. I woke up the next day ready to get to work when Michael called me that his boss was coming over to the house to get some particular documents he had left behind. I knew that I was already going to be running late for work, and I decided to wait for Raphael. I was finishing up my breakfast when I heard the doorbell. I knew it was Raphael, and I invited him in. I gave him the documents, and he handed me my pair of earrings I left in his car last night. I thanked him, and I was about to lead him to the door when he begged me to make a cup of coffee for him. I agreed to do so because he was really a nice person, and he was just asking for me to do little. We continued to bond over the coffee, and Raphael kept flirting with me, and at first, I never saw it as anything serious, but it kept coming. He could tell me I was beautiful, and Michael was lucky to have me. It never meant anything to me, and I decided to overlook it. A few days later, Raphael kept visiting my restaurant, and he kept on flirting with me. There were days he could enter the restaurant and sit for hours watching me work and waiting for me to finish my work. In those days, I found the sweet side of Raphael. I got into the restaurant one morning, and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raphael. It brightened my day, and a few minutes later, I received a call from Raphael, and we talked, and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raphael was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him over it. I talked to Michael about when he was coming back because I missed him, to which he said he had returned in a week's time. I was very excited because finally he was coming back and I was not going to be lonely again. A day later, Raphael asked how long it was since I went out for dinner, and I couldn't remember, to which he suggested we go out for a friendly dinner. I accepted because I thought it was harmless and all. And since it was going to take a few days before Michael returned, I decided to take him up on his offer. I got dressed and Raphael picked me up. I didn't know how he knew my favorite restaurant, but I was happy to be there. We ate and talked for a while. With Raphael, it was very easy to communicate because he always puts you at ease. I checked my time and I discovered time had passed and there were only a few people remaining at the restaurant. At that point, I was very tipsy. Raphael offered to drop me home, but I had to decline because it was really late and I didn't want to be driven for a long time. I told him to find me a hotel to sleep for the night and I could go home in the morning, but he suggested I could sleep in his guest room. I accepted and he drove us to his house. We got to his house and I knew I was tipsy because I couldn't see properly, and Raphael helped me change my clothes. One thing led to the other, and we started kissing. I didn't know what was going on in my head, but I wanted it to happen, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went blank. I woke up the next morning with a mild headache to see that I was in a strange place. Before I could make out where I was, I heard the voice of my husband, and the next thing was him standing at the door, looking at me horribly. I turned to the left and I saw Raphael naked on the bed. I saw a lot of pain in Michael's eyes, and I knew I was in trouble. I left the room without a word and I tried to get dressed and run after him, but Raphael held me back and told me to allow him to be for some time. I felt like it was not a good idea, and I got dressed quickly and went looking for Michael only to see he had left. I looked for a cab and went home looking for him, but he was not there. I kept on trying to reach Michael, but he was not answering me, and some days later Raphael came by to the restaurant, and I asked him if he knew where Michael had gone. But he didn't know I was getting irritated at that point because I wanted him to come face me and let us talk things through. A few days later, I woke up ready to start my day, and I decided not to think about everything for once and put myself first. I got to work, but my restaurant was closed. I was shocked because my employees are always early to work, and we don't close the restaurant at that hour of the morning. I got a paper served to me saying I was no longer the owner of my business because it had been sold. I thought it was a very good joke, and I started laughing. because I didn't see how it was possible. I decided to call Michael because he was the only one who could understand how I was feeling, but I couldn't reach him. I called Raphael, and he came as soon as he could. I gave him the papers with my hands shaking. Then Raphael told me after that Michael, being the legal owner of my restaurant, had sold it. I didn't want to believe him at first because I knew Michael wasn't that cruel. But I remembered what I did to him, and I couldn't hold my tears. My whole life's work had been thrown into the drain by Michael. That was the cruelest thing to do to anyone. I got home to see my things were outside with Michael standing at the door with the divorce papers. I begged him to listen to me, and I tried explaining to him that the house was mine too. But he said he had bought the house in his name. That's all he did to me. I can't believe he turned out to be a ruthless man. I'm still trying to process all that he did to me. Update. I've seen the comments, and I must say that you all are really cruel. None of you wanted to leave any stone unturned, and you made sure you crushed my pride. I guess I deserve it all. I cannot believe that I've ended up as a divorced woman who has lost everything. I thought things would charge, and I'd get back everything I've lost, but nothing like that happened. It's all gone, and it's as a result of my stupidity. At that moment, everything came crashing down on me. I had lost my restaurant, which I built with some much sweet, and I also lost my marriage, and I was homeless. It became clear to me that Michael was a cruel person who never thought of anybody but himself. This is everything he did to me, guys. I don't think I can ever recover from it. But I guess karma dealt with me. Picture a young girl with short hair and an average face growing up in an average family. My family wasn't rich, but they did their best to take care of me. I was bullied as a kid, so I was more of a loner than others. I didn't have many friends, not until my brother came along. His name is John. He was my best friend, and he still is. I was 5 years old when I held his small body in my hand. He practically followed me around everywhere. When I got into college, he didn't want me to go, and he cried. I shouldn't have gone, but I can't change anything that has happened, and I know that. Along the line, I started becoming an extrovert, and I was able to talk more with others. A lot of things have happened since then. I was also able to stand up for myself. I'm married now, and my life was going great, not until Alex, my ex-boyfriend, entered the picture. John didn't like Alex much, but I think it was a guy thing. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this, and you don't understand. So I'll start from the beginning. My name is Emily, and I want to tell you a story. I'm not a writer, so pardon me if there's any mistakes, but I'll make sure you'll understand what I'm telling you. This is my story, and I need everyone's help because I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning of my married life. I met Stan when I was 21 years old. We were both done with university, and since then, we hit it off. I gave him the cold shoulder at first. He never gave up on me, but the way he acted was different from Alex, not like I'm comparing. He's a really sweet and caring guy. We dated for a year plus, and he introduced me to his family. I loved his family, and they also loved me. It was great. Stan proposed to me, and I said yes. The marriage went smoothly. It was a very small wedding at a small church, and we invited just a few friends and family members. I didn't want something large because I hated being around crowds, and he respected that. I remember telling him the words, "I do." To be honest, I was scared of getting married because I didn't want it to hold me down, but eventually I had the courage. We've been married for a year now, and some problem came up. The first one is that I couldn't get pregnant, and I don't know why. Okay, maybe I know why, but we're trying to work on it. The doctor said I don't have enough eggs to fertilize, and I don't even know what that means. It's really upsetting because his family and also mine kept bothering me when we were going to get a baby. I don't know how to tell them that we're trying, but I know it's anytime soon. If nothing works, we have no choice but to say something. I would list the other issues as I keep writing. My husband, Stan, and I live in this 3-bedroom apartment which he bought, and I'm really proud of him. He also has this job that he's doing. I can't say where, but all I can say is that he's a lawyer. From someone who came from a very average home, I would say this is a huge job, and I can't stop bragging about it to my friends. I also have a teaching job. I teach kids in kindergarten, and I have to say that it's a really fun thing to do. I really want kids of my own, and we're still trying to figure something out. Now, picture a Wednesday evening where the sun rays are shining since it was summer. My friends came over that evening for our little book club that we do. I love reading books, and I also met others who do. There are 3 of them. There's Sarah, she's the nerdest in the group, and she's fun to be around. There's also Tracy, who is the hottest in the group, or at least the other friends say that. And the last one is Anna. She's the clown of the group because she makes everyone laugh. You can say that I'm kind of in between everything, and I love myself for that. It was my day off from work then because I was a bit of a part-time teacher. I only go to work on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays, so Wednesday and Thursdays were my day off during the weekdays. Stan was at work that day, and I was having fun with my friends. We discussed a lot of things. It was already late, so they told me bye, and I escorted them out. I heard my phone vibrate, and I thought, who would be calling me right now? I didn't hear it vibrate anymore, so I figured out it was a text. I don't receive texts except for my mail concerning a work-related thing, so this was surprising. When I checked it, it was from an unknown number. I was very curious now. I opened the message and I was shocked. The message was from Alex, my ex, who I hadn't heard from in more than a year. He didn't even come to my wedding, not like I was expecting him to. I knew this was him because the text he sent was, "Hey Em, it's Alex. I don't know if you still remember me, but hit me up if you do." You might be thinking, I know many Alex. Or maybe you're not, but the point is that he's the only one that calls me Em. I was wondering how he got my number, considering I didn't think he'd have it with him. And before I could even think of texting him then, my phone crashed. There's another story for that. I met Alex when I was in college. I was a freshman and he was a sophomore. He was this proud person who I didn't like at first. He assumed everyone was in love with him because he was this handsome guy, and I didn't like it because he was right. And most of my friends had a crush on him and pushed themselves on him. I tried my best to ignore him every time, but for unknown reasons, he kept trying to come closer to me. I noticed this at first, but I tried to ignore it. Perhaps I was just overthinking it. I figured it out when he came to me in person trying to start a conversation with me, but I only walked away. I didn't want attention to myself, and I intended to be very low-key, but he was trying to make things worse for me. He came again to me, and I spoke my mind to him. I asked him why he was trying to talk to him when clearly there were other girls that wanted him, and he only scoffed. He talked about how he didn't care about others, and he's been watching me from afar. I laughed because that was creepy, but I still didn't believe him. He tried getting closer to me every time, by talking to me, walking with me, and even telling everyone that I was his very good friend. Each day, it looked like the girls around hated me while my friends showed that they were jealous. A month had passed and Alex asked me out. I turned him down at first, and he never gave up. He told me he liked me and wanted to date me. I didn't believe him because boys weren't trustworthy, especially not in college. Yet Alex didn't give up and he kept trying to go out with me, but I said no. There was a day where I finally said yes and agreed to go out with me. He looked so excited about it, and that made me smile too. I asked him where we would be going, and he said he was going to come pick me up at home. He knew where I lived since he walked home with me sometimes. I told my mom and dad about the date, and they smiled. I was 18 then, so they said they would let me go on the date with him. I did everything to look extra pretty for him. I didn't completely like him, but maybe I did feel something for him. He came over and he was amazed when he saw my short hair let down even when I usually packed it up in school. His eyes also scanned my blue dress that I wore. I hoped it wasn't too much. I scanned him too and thought he looked really good with the black suit he wore. At first I hoped my dressing wasn't too much. Now I was thinking I didn't dress well. He greeted my parents and they investigated him before they let us go. We laughed at that because his voice was shaky throughout. I apologized to him for the pressure they were putting on him. John was also around, but he just glared at him, and it was funny because it made Alex uncomfortable. We went to his car, and he opened the door for me just like a gentleman. I was honestly delighted by that. He also complimented me, which took me aback. He had given me compliments, but not as sincere as this. Alex took me to a fancy restaurant, which was my first time there, coming from an average family. I thought dates were burgers or pizza places. That night, Alex and I discussed a lot of things. I found out things about him. He told me he was an artist, and I was amazed. No one knew about that except one close friend that he trusted them not to tell anyone. The fact that Alex had a hobby like that was what surprised me more. We ordered some food, and even the food was fancy and tasted good. I asked Alex to show me his art, and he brought out his phone and showed me some that he snapped. I remember one which was a little girl holding a flower, and it was something I'd never seen before. It was a unique drawing, and he had talent. I also told him things about me, about my family, and where I come from. I asked him when he started liking me, and he said, "It just happened." My first kiss was with him, and it was a blissful memory. The night was over before we knew it. I hated how the night ended so quickly because I wanted to spend more time with him. He took me home and I told him bye. The next day was almost the same as every day, except this time I accepted Alex and everyone knew we were dating. This went on for almost a year before things changed. He told me he wanted to talk to me. I was scared because of the tone with which he said. I was thinking if he was fed up with me and wanted to break up. I wouldn't be surprised if it was that. But what he told me was different. He said he was going to travel out of the country to pursue his studies in art. That was a great thing to me because I remember asking him if he had any plans since he was great at it. I knew there was something more with the way he looked at me, and I feared that I knew what it was. He told me he had to break up because he couldn't have a long-distance relationship. I remember begging him not to, that we could work on it. I also remember telling him that I liked him so much and I wanted to have something with him, but he kept turning me down and said he couldn't work out. We maintained distance then, and I was pissed. I was angry at him but more at myself because I wanted someone and the person didn't. He tried talking to me sometimes, but I didn't want to hear anything from him. He left the country some days after and he didn't even say goodbye. I was pissed because he had my number and he couldn't call. I also had his number, but I couldn't give up my pride to text or call first. Around that time, my phone got damaged and I lost all the contacts. I didn't think I'd be hearing from Alex. Well, at least, not until now. I was still looking at the message and contemplating whether I should reply back or not. I did what my instinct said, and I replied to him. I was hesitant and walked around wondering if he would text back. I was thinking maybe he texted me by mistake, and my silly mind replied to him, and it was probably a joke. My phone vibrated after a few minutes, and I immediately checked it. His message read, "Hey, it's been long. I know it's weird that I was expecting his text, but it didn't mean anything. I just felt glad that I meant something to him and he still remembered me. I should have stopped texting him then, but a part of me wanted to talk to him, so that's how it started." We kept texting back and forth each day. Alex informed me about lots of things. It was all through texts, but I know we shared a lot of feelings too. He informed me about how his study in arts went well. He asked me things about what I was doing and about my career. I thought about whether I should lie at first, but I couldn't because I love my husband. I told Alex that I was married and he didn't reply. I was thinking maybe it was a bad idea, but my mind changed when he texted me back. He told me it was great that I was married and he hoped I was happy. It didn't sound sincere to me when I read it, but I left it at that. It's been a week since we were chatting and everything was going great. He asked me where I was staying now because he wanted to come visit. I was against it, but it didn't seem bad since it was just an old friend who's also an ex. There was just one problem, and it was that Stan didn't know. I didn't know if I should tell him because it was concerning my ex, and he knew all about our past. I was looking for something to justify what I was doing. I tried telling myself that there's nothing wrong in texting an ex. Alex and I kept texting, talking about life and sharing more things. I made a mistake one day. I still didn't see the use of telling my husband about him since it was just Alex and I. I was chatting with Alex one day, and Stan asked me why I was always on the phone. He knew I didn't text much, so it looked weird to him. I don't know why I lied and told him it was nobody. I left my phone for a second to go to take out the trash, and when I came back, I saw my phone in his hand. I became angry, and I don't know why. I think one of the reasons is because I was wondering why my phone was in his hand. It meant he didn't trust me. I was also angry at myself because I knew I would have to tell him the truth. He looked at me and I asked him what he was doing with my phone. He said a call came in, but he had a question for me. Who was Alex? He knew about my ex, Alex, but he wanted to confirm it was him. I asked him why he was looking at my texts, but he didn't answer me. Can you believe that? He went on with the questions, and I told him the truth about how it was my ex. He frowned and shouted, asking about why I would be texting my ex. I told him it was no big deal, and he should stop making it sound huge. He was exaggerating. I mean, it's normal to text your ex, right? I also argued with him that it wasn't me that texted him first and he was the one. It's just a longtime friend of the past. Yet Stan kept overreacting, saying he texted for a purpose, but I don't believe that. He told me to stop texting Alex, but I don't want to. Is that bad? Imagine how much he would react if I said he wanted to visit, though I don't want Alex coming between Stan and I. I collected my phone from him and went out for a walk. Stan kept telling me to come back because we were still talking, but I didn't want this conversation to keep going. I needed to clear my head. I don't know what to do right now because I'm stuck. Should I keep texting with Alex? It's not like he said he wanted to go out with me or anything. Even if he says that one day, it wouldn't bring any harm because we were friends. Or should I not text him anymore and listen to my husband? What if he truly has a purpose like he said? My mind is all jumbled up right now, so I need advice on what to do. Please help. Comments. 1. You, Reddit user 1. What's wrong with you? I mean that in the most absurd way. Because why would you want to choose an ex over your own husband? You do love him, yes? Something tells me that you don't. It's best if you think well on it because he probably deserves someone better than you. Why did you keep it secret from him in the first page if you had nothing to hide? 2. You, Reddit user 2. You, Reddit user 1. This is a tough situation, so don't be too hard on her. She came here because she wanted advice, so stop judging her. Emily, I believe you should take time to calm down and think well about this. Your husband may be right, it's not a normal thing for an ex to text you just to greet you. He also says he wants to visit. What normal person would want to visit their married ex? You should have a deep talk with Stan and tell him all about these, especially your feelings. You two sound like you have a great and special marriage. It shouldn't ruin so easily. 3. You, Reddit user 3. Why is no one talking about Alex? I'm only seeing talks about Emily and her husband. Hello, there's literally an ex here. Who's the problem? I believe Emily should contact Alex. You two have only been talking through texts, and you also don't know much about him. All you know is that he's in the city and he wants to meet you. So don't do silly things like keeping things from your husband and talk to him about it, so you two will be able to solve this issue. Talk to Alex. 4. You, Reddit user 4. Something tells me that you're the problem. Women never appreciate something good in front of them. Instead, they want the good thing they had in the past. You should fix this and don't let your marriage get destroyed. Update. It's been days since I had an argument with my husband. I tried talking to him, but he said he didn't want to talk to me till I did something about Alex. I also read the comments. Wow, there were some really mean ones, but I realized you guys were right. I was the problem right now. I love Stan, and even though Alex was a past thing, I still had a little bit of feelings for him. But this was only because he suddenly wanted to come back into my life. I talked to John, my brother I talked about in the beginning, and I told him that Alex was back. He sounded furious over the phone, and I told him the things that had happened. He said Alex couldn't come back and try to pry into my life when I'm finally happy. I talked to my close friends, if you still remember them, the ones from the book club. They also gave me some good advice like you all did, and it was to communicate with my husband. I begged him to talk to me. He finally agreed, and he asked me who I made up my mind on. Was it him or Alex? I shook my head and held his hands because that was an absurd question now that I heard it. I can't believe I wanted to destroy my marriage because of someone I felt something for before. I apologized, and Lee told Stan I chose him over and over again, and everything's normal now. The only problem remaining was Alex. He kept texting me and asking when we were going to meet, but I tried my best to ignore him. You're thinking why I didn't block him, but I didn't want to come off too strong, although that probably sounds like an excuse. Alex began calling me because he noticed, but I didn't answer. The phone calls became more too. Stan went to work one day, and it was on one of my days off when Alex called in. I answered it after staring at it for a few seconds, and I heard his voice. It had been so long since I heard his voice. It sounded deeper and different than the one I'd heard. It's been 3 weeks since he texted me, and I was just hearing his voice. But this time, I didn't feel the emotion anymore. I'm happy about that because I wasn't so sure. I didn't want to be attached to my ex while being with my husband. Alex said hi over the phone, and I answered him. He said my voice has changed, and I said the same. He asked me why I didn't text him anymore, and why I was ignoring his calls, so I told him the truth. I told him Stan and I were not comfortable with it. I didn't bother going into any further details because it was none of his business. I told him not to bother calling me anymore. He protested at first, saying he didn't see anything wrong in a friend calling a friend. I told him he didn't need to see that, but he just needed to know. I did ask why he suddenly texted me one day, and he told me the truth. He said because he missed me and missed what he had. He told me he felt disappointed when I said I was married. That made me cringe in a way, because was he expecting me to wait for him and accept him once he was back? It's been 3 years since I met Stan, and meeting him changed my whole life. I feel happier with him. Anyways, like I said, I told him it didn't matter and he should stop trying. He apologized to me and the call ended. Once Stan came back, I told him everything that we discussed and what had happened. I promised him I won't ever let anything come between me and him because I love him. I'm happy I got married. We also discussed more things about us going to the doctor concerning the pregnancy, or we might just adopt if nothing works. Thanks to everyone here that gave me all of this advice and helped me save my marriage.